Welcome to online classes. This is the last unit, that is sixth unit in our syllabus, that is exempt trade procedures. So under this particular unit we are going to discuss about the procedures that are followed in exempt trade, that is export and import trade, plus which are the financial institutions that are supporting for the growth of exempt trade from India, and also few other topics like foreign exchange rate determination. Then we also going to discuss about balance of payment aspect. So let us start this particular unit with exempt trade procedures. So basically, exempt trade, export and import trade, refers to exporting and importing of the goods and services from one country to another countries. And as we know, the concept of exempt trade was not so very popular after independence till globalization, that is till 1991. After we opened the restrictions on the importation and exportation of the goods and services from and to our country, and after government adopted globalization, liberalization and privatization policy, the concept of foreign trade, or so-called the exempt trade, became very popular from India. And all these terms and conditions that are followed is as per the Foreign Trade Development and Regulation Act of 1992. At present, foreign trade policy that what we are following, the amended one, is 2015 to 20, which became effective from 1st April 2015. So here under this particular topic, we are going to discuss about different stages in the export trade as well as import trade. Let us start from export trade. Export trade will have 5 stages which need to be followed by the exempt trader. So the first stage under export trade procedure is preliminaries. So basically, if any individual would like to become an exempt trader, it's very essential they have to obtain IEC number, which is nothing but import and export code number. Import and export code number can be obtained from regional licensing authorities unless it exempted by DGFT. The number mentioned in the document, which is very essential, it acts as a permission for them to enter into exempt trade. So registration is also very important. Initially, when any individual goes for registering themselves as an exempt trader, provisional registration which will be valid up to 6 months. Once it gets, or before it gets expires, he has to apply for permanent registration, and once he receives obtains the permanent registration, they have to apply for IEC number. And after after obtaining IEC number, they have to become members in various authorities, various institutions who are controlling the exempt trade from India. So these the exporters and importers may also obtain the membership from certain bodies like Export Promotion Council, India Trade Promotion Organizations, etc. So these memberships will help them to get the information and any kind of documentation which is necessary for undertaking future exempt trade from India. Okay, then after that, the second stage is inquiry, offer, receipt of confirmed order. Inquiry is searching for the prospective importers of various products from India to from the exporter to importer. So inquiry has to be sent or made by the prospective importer regarding his wish to import certain goods. Suppose if any importer from the other part of the shore or any country, so if they are willing to import any commodity, and when they search a prospective exporters for their goods, whatever they require, they have to send an inquiry to the exporter regarding their interest in importation of certain commodities. Once the exporter gets the inquiry, they have to submit. The offer is here we are talking about offer here. So offer is the proposal submitted by the exporter expressing his intention to export the commodity what the importer is willing to import. I repeat it, inquiry is sent by the importer to prospective exporters to just showing an interest to import certain commodities from the exporter. Once exporter gets the inquiry from the importer, he will send the offer. It's kind of proposal submitted stating that he is willing to export that particular commodity or goods that are interested by the exporter. So that is the second step, that is inquiry and offer. Once the offer reaches to the importer, he has to, that is importer has to send a receipt of confirmed order. So that confirmed order is nothing but pro forma invoice. So this invoice will contain various information which is very essential, and that is where they both exporter and importer will bind under a particular agreement. So this confirmed order is nothing but the invoice of the order. So it will include name of the buyer, who is the importer, his details will be given, description of the goods and prices. So whatever the goods that importer is willing to import, at what price he is willing to import, and other conditions of sale, which includes the validity. There will be a term period within which the exporter has to export the commodity. Escalation clause, within that span of time, by the time he has accepted the price, entering into an agreement, and by the time he exports a commodity, if at all there is a change in the prices due to variations in the factors, that is resource prices, maybe variations in the charges applicable for the transportation of the commodity from exporter to importer, or variations in the taxes or any other duties applicable, or shipment charges or packaging charges, there may be so many changes that may happen within that span of time. So if at all there is a rise in the prices of the commodities, so in that case, at what price, what increased price that the exporter is willing to export the commodities to importer. So that clause is called as escalation clause. Then delivery schedule, when the exporter has to deliver the goods to importer, that schedule will be given. Then inspection procedure, who is going to inspect the commodities that is going to be sent to the importer, will also be given. Usually before even packing the commodities, the delivery schedule will be indicated, and that will be done by the exporter. So that will be, the information of which will be given in the pro forma invoice itself. So inspection authority will conduct the inspection of the goods. Which is the authority which is going to undertake the inspection of the goods? If it is necessary, or sometimes generally also it is possible to give information by the exporter to importer. Then the next one is we have force majeure clause. The exporters may sometimes fail to deliver the commodities in time. Suppose due to some uncontrollable situations and circumstances, say for example it may be war or any natural calamities, etc. If at all exporter fails to export the commodities as per the delivery schedule that they have planned in the invoice, which is the next possible date that he is willing to export the commodities, so that clause need to be included, which is called as force majeure clause. So even that need to be predetermined. See, unforeseen expenses, but they are planning everything in the invoice itself. Then payment terms and conditions. It may be any documents related to letter of credit or documentation bill or bill of exchange. What exactly the documents that they are using as a part of payment, because payment will not be done immediately, so there will be time gaps between the exportation as well as the payment done by the importer. So what is the guarantee the importer is going to give it to exporter when they are undertaking that kind of heavy transaction between exporter and importer? So it is very essential to include the documents here. So payment terms and conditions will be included. Once all these things are entered clearly, importer has to confirm the order by signing in the invoice, and that becomes the confirmed order. So all the above the confirmed order, whatever the points that we have given here, everything are the documents, and once all these terms and conditions are accepted by the importer, he has to just merely sign in the invoice, which will states that he has accepted all the terms and condition. That is the result of the confirmed order. So after confirmed order, so the procedure of finance will start. Exporter has to look for various financing institutions or anybody who is ready to give finance for him to undertake either manufacturing activity or the purchase of the commodities. If at all he is not a manufacturer, he has to purchase the commodities or place the order with the manufacturer. For that he needs finance. And as we know, the volume of transaction in EXIM trade is very high, very heavy, so it is very essential to depend on any financing institutions for undertaking export or import activities in the EXIM trade. So procedure of finance is considered to be one of the important procedure. Then third one is regulation regarding exports. There are various regulations when it comes to exports. So what are the regulations that we are talking about? First one is packing and marking. So after the goods that are manufactured or procured by the exporter, he should arrange for packing and marking as per international standards, which are prescribed by various bodies. In India, the Bureau of Indian Standards has prescribed packing standards for certain items. So similarly, even in the other countries like British Standard of Packing Code and Exporters is also one institution. Similarly, we have International Cargo Handling Coordination Association for packing instructions will be given. So such authorities will prescribe what kind of packing is essential for which kind of products, okay, that are exported. You would have seen on the carton box like fragile, there will be symbolic terms which are used to denote certain type of commodities. So that is also as per the international standards. Okay, so packing and marking is also very essential. And then next one is quality control and pre-shipment inspection. Exporter has to arrange for the quality control and pre-shipment inspection in order to ensure the quality of the products are as per they have indicated in the invoice. So he has to ensure that whatever the quality that he promised to deliver to the importer, the same standard, same quality is maintained by the exporter. So he has to undergo the inspection here, which is called as pre-shipment inspection. So after pre-shipment inspection, suppose if at all exporter has got any kind of excise duty rebates, he has to apply it for that, so that because government is giving so much of rebates to promote EXIM trade from India. So if he is eligible for that, so he has to claim for the rebates of excise duty or bond without payment of the duty. Then we do have GR4 form. Actually, it is also called as GRI forms. GRI forms are those which are which need to be submitted by the exporter to Reserve Bank of India before after realizing every shipment of the commodity within 160 days of shipment. So that is what is required. The reason why Reserve Bank of India requires this GRI form is mainly for the purpose of getting the accountability of all the foreign exchange activities that is happening in our country. So that is one important document which is required. Then we have shipment. So shipment is where that is the fourth stage what we are talking about. So once now the commodities, the goods are produced, manufactured, inspected, packed and marked as per the international standards. Now it is a time for shipment. So for shipment they have to get the custom clearance. That is the first one. So for getting or obtaining the customs clearance, the exporter has to approach the port trust duties. So custom authorities, according to formal approval, after scrutinizing the complete set of shipment or shipping documents, they are going to provide or book a particular date and time for the shipment of the commodities from exporter to importer. Before the goods are exported, before they get the time slot or the date for exporting, they need to verify all the documents starting from invoice, GRI form, ER forms, then export license, letter of credit, certificate of inspection, forms of declaration, shipping bill copy, then quality control inspection certificate if at all it is required, or if it is not necessary they may not ask, and packing list, letter of registration certificate. All these documents are essential for obtaining the customs clearance and to get the slot for shipment of the goods from exporter to importer. So under this we do have some more important documents. Under that we have to discuss about let ship order. Once the customs clearance is obtained, so they are going to give the receipt which is called as let ship order. So let ship order is nothing but the receipt obtained by the exporter from port authorities as a part of the customs clearance, and the slot which is slot for shipping the order from exporter to importer. Then there is one more receipt which will be provided by these customs authorities. It is called as mate's receipt. After the goods are loaded on the ship, the captain of the ship furnishes the document to port superintendent. This document is called as mate's receipt. So there will be an in-charge captain on the ship because the goods are loaded in the ship. So he is actually delivering the goods from exporter to importer. So this actually certifies the loading of the cargo. This document provides the details of the goods, their conditions and time of loading and time of delivery of the goods, predicted time when they are going to reach it to the importers. All these details will be given, which is called as mate's receipt. Then port trust dues. So because of giving all the permission, shipment assistance to exporter, they are going to charge the payment which need to be made by the exporter. So the port trust authorities, after receiving the mate's receipt from the captain of the ship, they issue bill of lading, and for that port trust dues need to be cleared and that need to be paid by the exporter. So bill of lading, so that is one important document here. So the exporter's forwarding agent, so the agent of the exporter, who collects the mate's receipts and submit the same to the authorities, and in turn he collects the bill of lading from the port authorities. So these are all the documents which is very essential and which need to be submitted. The same need to be submitted to exporters bank. So it acts as a document for the exporters bank that the entire procedure that is followed for undertaking a particular shipment is completed clearly. So that is where, after paying the dues to the port trust authorities, the agent, either the agent or the exporter, receives a receipt called bill of lading. So that acts as a documentation for the completion of the procedure for export trade. So after that we have payment procedure. That is the last procedure involved, but there is one more I have added here as export incentives that I'll talk to you about now. Payment procedure includes the payment aligned document system. Aligned document system. Before that I forgot, I think I left one point here: shipping by other modes of transport. So suppose usually in the exempt trade they adopt water mode of transportation, sea route, because heavy and bulky items can be easily transported from one shore to another. Plus it is also considered to be the cheapest mode of transportation in the international business. For lighter items as well as perishable ones, usually they may choose air mode of transportation. So whichever the mode of transportation that they have adopted, those details need to be provided. Then coming back to payment procedure, for obtaining the payments, the exporter has to provide all the documents as I told you earlier, starting from invoice till the bill of lading. All the documents details need to be submitted to his bank, so that they will take care of any payment system payment that they have to receive it from the importers. So under this, as I told you, aligned documentation, Government of India appointed a committee to recommend documentation regarding exempt trade. This is mainly because as we know, every government calculates how much foreign exchange that they have earned in a particular year, how much they have made as a payment. Even for the purpose of calculation of GDP, every government requires all these details. So for that reason only, aligned documentation is also a system which Government of India has started, which includes invoice, again the same documents what we discussed, starting from invoice till bill of lading. All the documents copy need to be submitted by exporter in order to give a clarity regarding what is the volume of goods that they have exported, how much he is earning, and what is the payment mode that they have adopted, how much tax. All these details need to be provided to this under this line documentation system. Then suppose if at all exporter is eligible for any incentives, so in the form of duty drawbacks or excise duty refund or rebates, so he can apply it with the same authority in order to obtain any kind of incentives or duty drawbacks. Duty is excise duty that we are talking about. So suppose if at all he is eligible for any duty drawbacks paid on raw materials or components or consumable products or goods that he has exported, he is eligible to get that duty or the taxes what he has paid. He will get the refund. Similarly, excise duty refund is also like that, where exporter is eligible for refund of the excise duty. They can recover it after export if they have paid it in the beginning. So it is provided with the excise authorities without making. It can also be avoided, like without making payment, it can also be avoided if they are eligible. So this is what is called as export procedures. The next topic is import procedures. So similarly, just like how we discussed about export procedure, here we are going to discuss the import procedures. So importation refers to purchase of any goods from foreign countries, either for consumption or for sales in the country, or for using any capital goods or raw materials for further production activity. So anything is fine here. So we are talking about finished products, semi-finished products, as well as raw materials and resources from other country, then we call it as imports. So again, import process consists of 5 stages. They are as follows. So first stage is preliminaries. So preliminaries, as we know, like even we discussed in the export procedure, exempt trader has to obtain the IEC number from the controller of exports and imports in order to obtain permission for undertaking importation of a particular commodity or good from the importer. So that IEC number will be valid for 1 year. After the expiration of the time period, they have to renew the IEC number. Then second one is inquiring and placing the indent. So inquiring the prospective exporters. So the same thing happened. Now importation, we are talking about importation. The importer is from India. Suppose he has to inquire about the prospective exporters who is willing to export a particular good which he is willing to import at a particular price. So he will be searching among various prospective exporters from other countries of the world. So that is inquiry. Once he search a prospective exporter, he has to send an inquiry and he has to send the indent stating that how much commodity, what commodity he is willing to buy, at what price he is willing to buy, what quality he is expecting from him when he is importing the commodity, all those details, which is called as indent. He has to place an indent with the exporter. That is the second stage. The third stage is obtaining foreign exchange. As we know, in the international trade, it is not possible to use our Indian rupees because it is only the legal tender money in our, within our national boundaries. It doesn't have any international value. It cannot be used as an international currency because it doesn't have international recognition in the international market. So it becomes inevitable for the importer to obtain foreign exchange. So when he is obtaining the foreign exchange, first he has to obtain the permission. It's not exactly permission. So he has to inform to the exporter that what kind of, which currency he is willing to accept, what is the mode of payment that he is going to do. All these details need to be collected from the exporter, and he has to search for the required foreign exchange from the Exchange Control Department of Reserve Bank of India, and they have to produce the import license as well as prescribed forms as well as indent, why they require that amount of foreign currency for making payment. So they have to give a clarity here to Reserve Bank of India, stating that why they require foreign currency, what is the reason behind purchasing so much of foreign currency. So Reserve Bank of India releases the foreign exchange on the basis of the strength of application, availability of foreign exchange, and foreign exchange policy of government. So under this, actually arrangement of payment is one more which we need to include here. Obtaining foreign exchange, it comes under that. So the importer has to make the arrangement for paying for the imports after obtaining the foreign exchange. Now RBI has sanctioned him some whatever the foreign currency that he required for making payment to exporter. So now he has to make the payment arrangement. So if we are talking about the payment arrangement, maybe in the next slide I have given here, there are 6 modes of payment methodologies which are adopted in the EXIM trade. So he has to search for a particular payment mode on the basis of the mutual agreement between exporter and importer. Then payment of customs duties. So he has to pay the customs duties before importing the commodities from exporter, and he has to take the actual delivery. So that is what the import procedures. So I was telling you the documents that are required in import process. Letter of credit. So letter of credit, I think you would have known about letter of credit. Here is a center of international commercial transactions where importers, instead of paying for the imports before taking the delivery of the goods, request the bankers to issue a letter of credit that indicates that the banker will pay the exporter as long as the goods are shipped in accordance with the specified instructions and conditions in the invoice or indent. So thus importers bank issue letter of credit to importers. Letter of credit indicates that the bank will pay the value of the importers to exporters. Then we have documentary bill. I have given the explanation here. It is a bill which will be forwarded by exporter to importer's bank as a guarantee for making the payment on the request of the importer. So it's called as documentary bill. I think bill of exchange is also very much clear. It's a draft. Bill of exchange or draft is an order written by the exporter instructing the importer or his agent to pay a specified amount of money at a specified time period. So it is just nothing but a guarantee given by importer to exporter. Then we have one more important document, bill of lading, as we discussed in the previous topic also. It is a receipt issued by the port trust authorities after shipment of the commodities. It's a guarantee that they have shipped the commodities, goods from exporter to importer. So the same copy of bill of lading will be even issued to sent to importer. It acts as a guarantee for the importer that he will be receiving the commodities within a particular span of time. So once he gets the bill of lading, he will submit all the documentation necessary for his bank to make the payment to exporter. So that is why bill of lading is also used as a very important document in the import process. Then the next topic what we are going to discuss is financing techniques. So under this particular topic, as we know, international business agreements are very rigid when it comes to payment. So because it includes, it's not one currency that they are using, plus it is also very important because the volume of transaction is very high, plus the importers and exporters belong to different countries. So obtaining a guarantee on each other itself is very difficult. Plus we do have other complications here regarding the goods available, quality of the goods, prices of the goods, and other unexpected circumstances and reasons which may even destroy the agreement between the exporter and importer. So because of this reason, it is very essential that they have to adopt various financing techniques in order to make it more systematized when they are entering into a particular exempt trade agreements. So under that, the first issue what they need to discuss is regarding the currency to be used. See, as I told you earlier, in the international business transactions, the currencies, the payment by the importer to exporter becomes very difficult because of the variations in the currency values. So whichever the currency the exporter is willing to accept must be predetermined. So they have to decide what currency that they are using in that particular order. So when they are going to pay, what is the value of the currency, what exactly the exchange rate that they are going to adopt, because there will be time gap as well. So this is what is called as currency to be used as an issue. Then they have to even verify the credit worthiness of the importers. Simply, every importer may not get financial assistance from banks and financial institutions, or Reserve Bank of India may not provide the currencies required by all the importers without even verifying. They are going to provide the currencies, foreign currencies, based on the weightage of the application. So what is the weightage of the application? It is nothing but the credit worthiness of the importer. How genuine is the importer? How long he has been into this particular business activity? Like what category of the goods that he is importing or exporting. All these need to be verified, and only on the basis of the credit worthiness of the importer, RBI is going to provide the foreign currencies. That is the second issue that they have to discuss on. Then third one is acceptable mode of payment. So under this acceptable mode of payment, there, as I told you earlier, there are 6 modes of payment which can be adopted in the exempt trade. So first mode is payment in advance. So payment in advance, as it states, before exporting the commodity, the importer makes the payment to exporter. After exporter receives the payment, if he exports the commodity to importer, then it is called as payment in advance. So from exporter side, it is very good because he will be on the advantageous side. He receives advance payment even before shipment, so it is very convenient for him. But at the same time, the importer will be in the disadvantageous situation because he loses the money as well as the goods. Suppose if due to some natural calamity, suppose if the ship sinks, so he has to bear the huge loss there. So even though conceptually this kind of payment method or procedure is there, may not be accepted practically in the exempt trade. Then we have open account. So open account is a contradiction to the previous one, where the payment will be made at the later stage once the importer receives the commodities, goods. That is, when after importer obtains the delivery of the goods from the exporter, if he makes the payment, then it is called as open account. So first he receives, then makes the arrangement for payment. So that is also accepted. Usually that is what, where there is no, in both the cases there is no involvement of the banks. So in this situation, as bank is not involved, importer will be on the advantageous side because he is receiving the goods, then he makes the payment. So there is no guarantee for the exporter for his payment. So he may even no object this kind of payment. So payment in advance and open account is kind of insecure either to either of the parties. Third one is documentary collection. International financial institutions and banks have developed a number of financial institutions in order to minimize the risks and problems involved in both the cases, that is payment in advance as well as open document. So here we have bill of exchange. We also discussed about letter of credit. We have discussed about letter of credit. So bill of exchange, if we are talking about site bill and time bill, site bill requires payment immediately on spot, on site. So receive and give. So there will be a simultaneous action which is going to happen. They receive the goods and they make the payment. Whereas time bill, where as a title itself says, the importer is going to buy some time for making the payment. So where the bill act as a bill of exchange, act as a document, and a receipt as a guarantee for the exporter that he is going to receive the payment from the importer. So that is time bill of exchange. Then we have letter of credit. We have discussed about this in the previous slides, but I repeat it again. So it's an instrument issued by the bank, wherein the bank promises the exporter to pay upon receiving the proof that the exporter completed all necessary formalities specified in the document. So once bank receives letter of credit, it acts as a guarantee that importer is going to make the payment on or before certain time period which is mentioned in letter of credit. Then it is also possible to use credit cards. So credit cards are also, it's considered to be one of the most insecure mode of payment. So even though conceptually it is there, but it is also used for small international business transactions, but it is not so very safe to use this kind of credit cards in the international payments, but conceptually, theoretically it is there. Then we do have counter trade. Counter trade is nothing but a kind of barter system where exporter and importer on mutual agreement, if they require different commodities from each other, the value of the commodities what they require can be predetermined, and when instead of making any cash payments, exporter exports a particular commodity which is required by the importer. In return, the importer will export a commodity which is required by the exporter. So in this case, what is happening? Both are exchanging each other's goods instead of involving any kind of monetary transaction in the EXIM trade. So that is called as counter trade. I hope it is clear. So payment in advance, where importer makes the payment first and receives the goods. Open account, exporter exports the commodities to importer. After receiving the commodities or delivery of the goods, importer makes the payment. Documentary collection, each other, that is exporter's bank as well as importer's bank, involved in this particular transaction or EXIM trade, where they are going to take care of the payment. So they are going to use a particular financial instruments, either bill of exchange or letter of credit, which act as a guarantee for both of them, both the parties, that there is no fraudulent transaction. So importer is going to make the payment and exporter is going to export the commodities. So credit cards, the regular credit cards can also be used for international transactions in the EXIM trade, even though it is not so very secured. Small international transactions in the EXIM trade, this kind of payment is used. Counter trade, where exporter and importer exchange each other's commodities which is required as per the pre-agreement between them. Okay, there ends both the export and import procedures. The next topic what we are going to discuss under this particular unit is banks and financial institutions that are supportive of the development or promotion of EXIM trade. So there are, there are various financial institutions which are supporting this. Here we are going to discuss two important institutions. The first one under that is Export Credit and Guarantee Corporation of Corporation Limited, that is ECGC, and Exim Bank. So first let us start with ECGC. So Government of India actually set up ECGC in 1964. Actually before that it used to be called as Export Risk Insurance Corporation, ERIC. Originally it was established in 1957 in order to provide export guarantee insurance support to Indian exporters, but it was transformed into ECGC in 1964. So the purpose of this particular institution is to provide financial help, financial guarantee to those exporters who are representing from EXIM traders representing from India. So even if we are talking about the board of directors, it mainly includes the representatives from government, bank, insurance, trade and industry. So we are just briefly going to touch the functions here. Functions of ECGC includes it guarantees export finance sanctioned by banks. So it acts as a guarantor for all those financial assistance provided by other banks and financial institutions in relation to EXIM trade. Then it provides assistance to small exporters whose annual turnover does not exceed 50 lakhs in order to encourage them to participate in EXIM trade. The third function is it covers the risk in respect of goods exported on short term credit, that is the credit not exceeding 180 days. This policy covers both commercial and political risks from date of shipment. So it is issued to exporters whose anticipated export turnover for the next 1 year is more than 50 lakhs. So for such exporters will receive this kind of risk coverage or risk comprehensive assistance from ECGC. It assists supply of contracts. So under this particular facility, the ECGC provides insurance against political, commercial and other risks to contracts for exports of capital goods or turnkey projects. So this particular assistance is provided mainly to turnkey projects whose value is very high. The financial transaction here is very high. So such kind of turnkey projects will be assisted by ECGC. So it also provides some special services to Indian companies in the form of transfer of guarantee, overseas investment, exchange fluctuation risk cover, etc. So to Indian exporters. So this is these are the functions of ECGC, which is acting as one of the apex institution for promoting foreign trade. Similarly, we do have one more institution which is doing, really, to be very frank, wonderful assistance is given by Exim Bank. Export Import Bank is shortly called Exim Bank. I think you are all aware about this. So it is set up in 1982 for the purpose of financing, facilitating and promoting foreign trade from India. It is a principal institution in our country that coordinates even other institutions engaged in the financing of exports and imports. Bank offers wide range of financial programs at par with the industrially developed countries, which is providing the financial assistance almost equivalent to the advanced countries of the world. And it finances exports of various items like machinery, manufactured goods, consultancy and technology based services as well. So it also provides finance projects jointly with global regional development agencies in order to enable Indian exporters to participate in overseas trade. So coming back to these functions, so first one is financial assistance. So it provides financial assistance for the export of goods under Foreign Exchange Management Act of, that is this act was formed in the as per the act of 1999, that is Foreign Exchange Management Act of 1999. So it provides financial assistance to export of goods, as I told you, export of machinery, equipment, manufactured manufactured products. It also provides assistance to turnkey projects. For example, setting up of the heavy manufacturing plant, basic and key industries, etc. Construction projects, as well as construction projects like construction of roads or dams or bridges and flyovers. It also finances consultancy as well as technology based services. Then it also acts as advisory to various exempt traders under its advisory services. So it provides information and support services to Indian companies to help and improve their prospects for securing business and multilateral agencies. So for the purpose of providing detailed information on projects of interest, information on procurement guidelines, policies, practices, multilateral agreements, etc. Then acting as consultancy, it established a consultancy services jointly with International Financial Corporation, Washington DC, in order to provide consultancy services, and it has provided consultancy services to Africa Project Development Facility, Africa Enterprise Fund, technical assistance and trust funds, etc. And not only that, even to Indian exempt traders, it is acting as providing or acting as consultants to Indian exempt traders. Then there ends the financial assistance provided by ECGC and Exim Bank. We'll be moving on to the next topic, that is balance of payments. See, you would have heard about two concepts, balance of trade and balance of payments. So balance of trade is a statement of all the transactions of goods or tangibles from any country within a particular span of time, say 1 year. Okay, so any tangible goods that are exported and imported, how much foreign currency that we have earned, foreign receipts that we have earned, how much payments that we have made is balance of trade. This concept is considered to be a little bit narrow because it includes only tangibles, that is only physical goods. The other counterpart is the balance of payments. So balance of payment concept is considered to be a little bit wider because it's a statement of all transactions of goods and services, which means it includes both tangibles as well as intangibles. So that is where it gives more realistic figures for the government for calculating GDP as well as national income. So balance today in this particular lecture we are going to discuss about this concept of balance of payment. So balance of payment, as I told you earlier, it is the statement of all transactions of goods and services made in one country over a defined period of time. It may be a quarter or semi-annual or annual. Usually annual year, that is financial year, will be considered while calculating balance of payment. So it takes into account the export and import of both visible as well as invisible items. It includes all goods, consumer goods, durables, capital goods, semi-finished products, semi-finished goods or spare parts, whatever that we have imported or exported, all its value will be considered. So there are two important components of balance of payment: current account and capital account. Current account includes visible exports and imports and invisible items like receipts and payments for various services like banking, insurance, transportation, tourism, travel, etc. See, as we know, in India after globalization, if we observe, there is a drastic improvement in the tertiary sector. The service sector is overtaking the other two sectors in our economy in terms of revenue. So because of this reason, it is very, very essential to even include these invisible sectors because of the earnings what is happening in that particular sector. So current account includes, that is the reason why current account includes both visible exports and imports as well as invisible exports as well as its imports. There are three broad components in the current account. Balance of trade. Balance of trade refers to the statement of record of all the tangible goods. Goods exported and imported from and to a country. Net factor income. Net factor. Factor refers to the factors of production. How much income is earned or payment made for, sorry, here we are talking about income. So how much income that we have earned through these kind of, that is factors, that through factors, that is capital goods. Then net transfer payments. How much payment is done by government in the form of loan repayment, in the form of donations, etc. will be considered. So this considered to be the most traditional form of international trade, which is compared to capital account. Current account is considered to be the traditional form by Indian government because transactions tend to be more immediate, more visible, and than the transactions that are recorded in the capital account. Then we do have capital account as one more component of balance of payment. As I told you earlier, current account is more immediate, but here capital account is less immediate and more invisible than current account. Why? Because common forms of capital account transactions includes foreign direct investments or loans from foreign governments rather than the income that they have earned in the form of the net factor income or balance of trade, etc. So because of this reason current account is considered to be more accurate and immediate compared to capital account. It is divided into three parts: private capital, banking capital, and official capital. So private capital is a capital that is provided as investment. Banking capital covers movements like external financial assets and liabilities of commercial and cooperative banks authorized to deal in the foreign exchange. Then official capital, where Reserve Bank of India's holdings in terms of foreign currency and special drawing rights held by government are the categories into loans, amortization, and miscellaneous receipts and payments by the government. So I hope the concept of balance of payment is clear. So we will be moving to the next topic, that is causes for the disequilibrium in the balance of payment. So what is disequilibrium here? Disequilibrium refers to deficit in the balance of payment. There are two concepts here: surplus in the balance of payment and deficit in the balance of payment. Suppose if balance of payment of a country is surplus, where the value of the exports is greater than value of imports, then the government as well as the country will be, or economy will be, in the favorable position. That is, if suppose Indian government's balance of payment states that the value that they have earned in the form of foreign currency is through different modes is greater than whatever the foreign currency that they have paid to other foreign countries, then definitely exports, the value of exports are greater than value of imports. So in this situation, Indian government will be in the favorable position. There is no worry about there is no worry for the government to think about balance of payment in this situation. But it is not so. Here we are talking about disequilibrium. The other aspect, as I told you, is deficit. So what is deficit we are talking about? If the value of the imports are greater than the value of exports, in this situation, government will land up in making payment more rather than receiving the foreign exchange indirectly. So whatever the foreign currency that we have received as income is lesser than whatever the payment that we have made in foreign currency. currencies. That is what the topic, disequilibrium in the balance of payment. So there are various factors here. Some of them I have quoted it here. So first factor or first cause for the disequilibrium in the balance of payment is economic factors. So obviously economic factors are the ruling factors or causes which lead to disequilibrium in the balance of payment or deficit in the balance of payment. So under economic factors, the first factor is development disequilibrium. Development disequilibrium is mainly includes those economies which are still considered to be developing country. So for example, India is one important developing country in the world. As a part of its economic development, in order to achieve higher level of economic development, as economic activities is so brisk, it is very inevitable for the government to undertake various development projects. It may be providing infrastructural facilities, providing various social goods to people, or construction of bridges, dams, this, etc. So what happens? They have to shell out huge sum of money on these development projects. So when they are doing or providing all these facilities, as spendings increases rather than income what they earn, even though they are earning good amount of income through exports, as their spendings are more than the income that they are earning, that kind of deficit created is called as development disequilibrium. It's something like that. You earn good amount of income, but you have so much of expenses, you will end up in paying more than what you are earning. So that is development disequilibrium. Then we have cyclical disequilibrium. Cyclical fluctuations in the business activity. So you know what are business cycles? There are four important phases, rather five important phases I will say: depression, recovery, prosperity, boom and recession. So business will be fluctuating among all these five phases always. So due to fluctuations in these phases of business cycle, government or the country will land up in experiencing more payment than earning more. So that is what is called as cyclical disequilibrium. Then we do have a structural disequilibrium. So structural disequilibrium is where it changes in an economy mainly when it shifts from the agricultural sector to some other sector. Say basically India is an agricultural country, right? We call our country as agricultural country. But after globalization, what happened? There's a complete transformation of our occupation from agriculture to industrial sector, now industrial sector to service sector. So there will be a shift in the occupation. Even though even today we call our country as an agricultural country, the income obtained from agricultural sector is far lesser than, and it is also deteriorating, so far lesser than the other two sectors. So what is happening here? We are transforming to other sectors, we are stepping into other sector as a source of our livelihood, as a part of earning our income. So the structure of the economy is changing. So due to this reason, there is expenses that is increasing over a period of time. So payments is increasing rather than income. So that is what is called as structural disequilibrium. Then we have secular disequilibrium, which mainly refers to long-term trends in the economic factors. So long-term trends are set by the government, just like the business organization, mission and vision. There will be vision for every country which is set by the government, what they have to achieve after a certain time period. Say for example, India has to become economic superpower by this particular time period. Even 2020 was one remarkable year that they had planned for, but it couldn't work. So again they have postponed it to 2025. So there is a particular target which is set by the government, which they need to achieve in order to make the economy very strong. So that is what is called as secular or achieving long-term trends in the economic factors. In order to become more and more strong, what we have to do? We have to provide, the government has to provide education facilities, job opportunities, the employment opportunities, make strong all the peoples are gainfully employed, help them to increase their per capita income so that government gets the national income, increasing the GDP, sustainability in the economic development of all the sectors of the economy. So all these are very, very essential. They have to even strengthen the defense aspect, they have to increase the different modes of transportation, so they have to spend huge sum of money. So I will say it is infinity and beyond. So they have to spend so much of money. There is no end for the money that is spent by the government. So when they are doing all these things, all these changes in a particular economy, definitely the spendings of the government increases. Even though the exports are increasing, export earnings are increasing, but due to uncontrollable spendings by the government, the payment is also increasing, and which is also overtaking the the income earned by the country. So that is what is called as secular disequilibrium. Then the next factor, we are moving on to the next factor, I think. Yeah, political factors. So political uncertainties, changes in the government policies. Today we have adopted free trade policy, tomorrow we may transform to protectionist policy. Seeing the world around us, we can make out what kind of trade policy we need to adopt. Now if we observe closely, we have stopped buying food from Swiggy or Zomato, or getting even ordering things from online shopping or Amazon. Why we have done that? In order to secure ourselves. Even government may take such drastic decisions in order to protect the country from foreigners, from foreign problems, or any kind of danger that may be posed to national security. So in this situation, what happens? Suppose tomorrow if our government announces that we are no more following or adopting policy of free trade, definitely it affects also lead to disequilibrium in lines of payment. Then we do have social factors. So social causes mainly include changes in the culture, changes in the taste and preferences of the people, fashions, or etc., because of fluctuations in the affordability. So as we know, we are the impact of globalization is people are getting influenced to other culture, other religion, or changing in the lifestyle, lifestyles, etc. So that is leading to changes in the demand pattern. So that is also becoming one of the cause for disequilibrium in the balance of payment. Okay, so the next topic is methods of correcting disequilibrium. Automatic corrections. Automatic correction is based on the market forces of demand and supply, based on the demand for various currencies of the world. So it automatically corrects itself in the international market. So that is, none of the government or monetary institutions are going to intervene in this. So that is what is called as automatic corrections. Second correction we are talking about is the deliberate measures. So deliberately, if government takes some measures to correct the disequilibrium or deficit in the balance of payment, so those measures are called as deliberate measures. So first one under that is reduction in the money supply. See, money supply, we are talking here about inflation. As we know, because the income of the people are increasing considerably because of increased payment, increased per capita income, so that is leading to inflation. When there is overflowing supply of money in the economy, leads to deterioration in the value of currency. Once the value of currency deteriorates, automatically that leads to inflation. So in under this particular deliberate measure, it asks the Reserve Bank of India or Central Bank of the country to reduce the money supply in the economy. So RBI may adopt various methodologies, either bank rate policy or open market operation, or CRR is more effective. So technique what they adopt. So correcting the CRR, cash reserve ratio, is one methodology through which they are going to reduce the money supply in the economy. So that is one of the deliberate measure. Then we have devaluation of the currency. Devaluation is reducing the currency value in respect of or against the foreign currencies by government is called as devaluation. So here it is not the valuation of the currency is not automatic. It's not based on the market forces of demand and supply, but it is mainly because of the deliberate action taken by either monetary authorities or government in order to safeguard the value of the domestic currency. So that is what is called as devaluation. Then it can be even exchange control. So RBI poses restrictions for the importations from our country, how much they have to export, how much they have to import. Usually there will not be much restrictions on the exports, but they pose restrictions on the importation in order to avoid extreme payments to foreigners. So that is exchange control. Then we have trade measures as one of the method. So export promotion, promoting the exports. So even from the products from, the goods from small scale industries, medium scale industries, all these are promoted to exempt trade in order to earn higher foreign exchange. So that is export promotion measure. And import control. So in order to avoid payments, in order to increase the earnings, foreign currencies, government may put a restriction as we discussed in the previous point. So they may ask to reduce the importation of the commodities. Instead of that, they try to produce a commodity or substitute by producing the commodity within the country. So it is called as import substitution policy. Okay, then miscellaneous measures may also be, and it is also more automatic, increasing FDIs that is happening in our country, FDI and FIIs, and NRI investments are also attracted by providing them attractive offers in order to increase the inflow of capital in the country. We'll be moving on to the next topic, that is exchange rate determination. What is exchange rate? It is a rate at which one country's currency is exchanged for another country's currency. That is, a unit of home currency will be exchanged for the foreign currency or vice versa. So usually, like if we say, for example, today's value I have given here, $1 is equal to 75.87 paisa Indian rupee. So around 76 rupees we can quote it here. So the unit of foreign currency is $1 and is exchanged for the unit of home currency, that is 76 rupees Indian currency, Indian national currency, INR. So here it is usually determined, now in the foreign exchange market at present, it is determined on the basis of demand for and supply of a particular currency. So what is the demand and supply? They are called as market forces. So they drive the market in the international level. That is, demand, as we know, in the international transactions, only certain key currencies of the world are in greater demand. That is, they are demanding only these currencies because of their international recognition and transaction. So any exempt traders or any kind of international transactions requires these key currencies for transaction purpose at the international level. So the demand, based on their demand and their supply, the values of the currencies will be determined. That is what is called as demand for and supply of the currencies. So demand and supply are the two market forces, as I told you. Other than these two forces, none of the government or monetary institutions dare to intervene, because it is completely a flexible or a floating exchange rate, that system that is followed in the world, where it is determined on the basis of demand and supply. So why demand for foreign currencies or foreign exchange arises? The reasons for foreign exchange. So first, it is again demand and supply. Why demand for foreign exchange arises? First one is imports for goods and services. Suppose if we import any commodities, goods and services, we have to make payment in the international market. For that reason, we need payment. We need foreign currency to make payment. Second reason is investment in foreign countries. Suppose if India would like to invest in any business activity in the foreign country. When they are investing, they cannot invest in Indian rupee, but they have to invest in the foreign currencies only. Then payment from home government to foreign governments in the form of donations or in the form of any other payments that our government makes it to foreign governments, then it is called as payments from the home government. For that is one of the reason for the demand for foreign currency again. Then outflow of capital in the form of donation, as I told you earlier. Suppose if we are donating it to any third world countries, or if we are donating it for any social cause or something, then it has to be in the foreign currencies only in the international level. So these are the reasons why countries demand for foreign exchange. Then supply of foreign exchange. First reason, increase in the export. Suppose if we export more goods and services, we are going to earn more foreign currency. Then second one, payments made from foreign institutions and government. Suppose if they are repaying the loan amount, if they have taken any loan from Indian government or RBI, suppose if they are returning back, they are repaying the loan amount to our government. So that is where we are receiving foreign exchange. Similarly, inflow of capital in the form of FDI, in the form of FII, investments is happening in our country where we are earning foreign currency. So that is where the demand for foreign currency as well as supply of foreign currency arises. There are two types of exchange rate: fixed exchange rate and flexible exchange rate. So we have to discuss these two. Fixed exchange rate used to be determined by IMF to its member governments, member countries governments. They used to determine the exchange rate, which used to be called as pegged exchange rate system or par value. So why it is to be called like pegging? What is the meaning of pegging? They are going to see the demand for and supply of various currencies based on its demand in the international sphere. Based on if any currency has got higher demand in the international market, they used to give higher value in respect to other currencies of the world. That is why it used to be called as pegged exchange rate system or par value. Par value means face value of the currencies. So that is where under this particular fixed exchange rate system, only IMF used to determine the exchange rates for the currencies. It used to be even called as IMF exchange rate system also, but now no more we follow this. But as a part of this explanation, why we need this system? To ensure certainty and confidence among all the currencies. They used to treat all the currencies equally. They used to see to it that there is no wide fluctuations in the values of different currencies of the world. So in order to maintain that kind of almost uniformity, this is more useful. To promote long-term investments, to prefer all the key currencies equally, as I told you earlier, and to maintain a equal economic stabilization and standard throughout all the countries, all the member countries. This kind of exchange rate system was followed, which they used to call it as fixed exchange rate system. But now the system what we are following is flexible exchange rate system. So what is flexible exchange rate system? That is what we are discussing from the beginning of this topic. Flexible or floating. The exchange rate between the currencies are determined on the basis of market forces of demand and supply only. So if any currencies in the world are determined on the basis of the automatic forces of demand and supply, then that system is called as flexible exchange rate system. It is also called as I told you, floating. What is floating here? The forces of demand and supply. So no government, no international monetary institutions will interfere in determining the exchange rate. So why the system is more useful? Why we have adopted this? It is mainly to determine the exchange rate automatically throughout the world. So no favoritism. It's an unbiased system what they have adopted. It happens automatically based on the currencies that are demanded in the international sphere. Higher the demand for a particular currency, higher will be the value, and vice versa. So you can even imagine some of the key currencies here, maybe US dollar or pound or euros. All these are greatly demanded in the international market. So their values are high compared to Indian rupee. The second reason is to ensure continuous process. There is no here stagnation of any value. So every day, every minute there will be fluctuations. If you see in the internet or in the business channels, every day the values of foreign exchange market among various currencies will be fluctuating. So it is a continuous process. Whatever maybe the disturbances happens, the process of the fluctuations in the values will not stop. Then to promote foreign trade, suppose if we export more, we are going to earn more. So it is a motivation, it's a kind of motivation for the exporting country to earn higher foreign exchange. To stabilize the exchange rate in the long run. IMF, when they had adopted fixed exchange rate system, it was a very rigid exchange rate system. The rigidity, actually it was very suffocating. That's the reason why this every country adopted floating exchange rate system. So in order to stabilize the exchange rate among various currencies or between various currencies, in the long run, it is better to go for flexible exchange rate. So we have adopted the next reason, free trade. So globalization is a reason why there must be free movement of goods and services from one country to another country. As we have adopted free trade, even the currencies need to be determined freely only only with the help of the automatic forces of demand and supply. Then to ensure effectiveness in the monetary policy. Monetary policy is the policies of Reserve Bank of India. Any monetary policy that is formulated by the central bank of the country, always see to it that our GDP increases to a greater extent. In order to achieve higher economic development, it strives hard to reach all these levels. So for that reason, in order to make monetary policy more and more effective, flexible exchange rate system is more prominent and helpful. So there ends our syllabus. We have completed all the chapters, and this is also the last topic of the 6th unit. Thank you, students.